Hi, and welcome to the Master Investor Tip TV show. My name's James Faulkner, and I'm the editorial director of Master Investor magazine. I've got Victor Hill with me today.
Hi, James.
Hi, Victor. And Victor's here to talk about his feature article in the June issue of Master Investor magazine. And that's all about cybersecurity. So, Victor, we've had some really high-profile cybersecurity incidents lately. Can you give us an overview of the sector and a bit of background as to what's going on?
Well, thank you, James. We had a major global cyber attack back on Friday, the 12th of May. It's a day that I call Cyber Black Friday, just to give it a name. And on this particular occasion, computer systems across the world were paralyzed by a form of malware which was called WannaCry. It's a form of ransomware whereby the victims of this attack are invited to unlock their files only by paying a ransom. In this case, it was an amount of Bitcoin equivalent to a mere $300. Yeah. But the actual breadth of disruption was quite extraordinary because you had 60 National Health Service hospital trusts which were paralyzed, operations were cancelled, doctors were unable to access their patients' record. You had Deutsche Bahn in the German state railway company. Their information panels went blank. You had Telefonica in Spain unable to operate certain telephone networks. There was a Russian ministry which was incapacitated. Its websites went down. Chinese universities. So this was a most extraordinary attack in terms of its global reach, if not in terms of its sophistication. And although we knew that cybersecurity is a major issue in the modern world in which we're increasingly dependent on interconnected computer systems, this put the whole issue of cybersecurity into focus and made it to the headlines for about 4 days running.
And there are many forms of cybersecurity attacks. There's some are state-sponsored terrorism.
There are.
Some are just geeks in the bedroom sort of messing around with computers.
Right, yeah. I mean, I put it on three levels like this. First of all, you have the governments, which are deeply involved in both intelligence gathering, cyber spying of one kind or another, and they're all doing it because they're all trying to keep ahead of the next guy. And then you have criminal organizations and gangs, which are obviously intent on fraud and profit through nefarious means. And these are increasingly sophisticated, and it's very difficult to track them down and to know exactly from where they're located, from where they're operating. And then, as you mentioned, you've got these adolescent computer geniuses, the geeks, sitting in their bedrooms in garden suburbs behind the curtains, happily disrupting major state security systems by night. And again, it's possible to track them down, but it's not a straightforward matter. So the whole framework, the whole architecture of international cybersecurity is now one that is in a rapid evolution.
And how big is the market for cybersecurity?
We think that last year the market for software and services relating to computer security amounted to something like $40 billion, but that's probably an underestimate because in fact we know that most large corporations have been hacked or attacked. Even small and medium-sized businesses in the UK admit to a very high level of penetration by criminal swindlers of one kind or another. And in fact, it's suspected that the level of penetration by these gangsters is higher than companies will admit, because to admit that you've been hacked is to admit a weakness, and it doesn't exactly engender confidence amongst your customer base. So we know there were some very high-profile cases last year, for example, TalkTalk and Tesco Bank and others. But this is probably the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. So this is a market that's going to grow for quite some time and at quite a significant rate. How can investors gain access to this market?
Well, there are a number of different operators in this space who are doing somewhat different things. But essentially there are already a number of listed entities which are specializing in computer protection of one kind or another. And I just mentioned in the article a few listed entities, amongst them Sophos in the UK, located in Abingdon. They have been accumulating new customers at a rate of about 10,000 customers per month. These are mostly corporates, mostly small to medium-sized businesses, and they've managed to grow their annual revenue to over 400 million sterling in the last 12 months, with a target to grow that up to 1 billion by the year 2020. So although they're actually still losing money, this company is one to watch, and I've just looked at the share price. Just now it's up to 449 pence. That means since Cyber Black Friday, 12th of May, they've put on about 35% onto their share price.
Okay.
So there is obviously a causal relationship between that and the fact that they have benefited from very positive publicity.
And presumably most of the large cap technology companies have exposure to this sector?
Well, they do. I mean, all the big guys are involved in this business. Of course, Microsoft, Intel, IBM, obviously Cisco, BAE Systems even has a department dedicated to cybersecurity.
So that would be kind of the low risk entry into that sort of space. What about for the more adventurous investors? Are there any smaller cap companies?
Well, there are. There are a few outliers. They're quite interesting little operations. Correro is one to look out for, but be aware that the share price has not performed historically very well, although they have benefited from recent developments. In Finland, there's a company called F-Secure, which is listed on the Helsinki Stock Exchange. And there's a whole lot of unlisted entities out there which could very probably at some point be floated off, and they're to watch. And there was one in particular which I thought was worth a mention. It's a very interesting company founded by quite literally 3 British rocket scientists. One has a PhD in mathematics, one in atomic physics, and one in computer science.
Okay.
And they formed a company called Elliptic PLC. And this is, I believe, a baby unicorn, because this company stands at the intersection between cybersecurity and cryptocurrencies.
Right, okay.
And they alone have the ability to trace back Bitcoin transactions and to identify the parties involved in those transactions. And that may sound something like a very straightforward technology, but it's not, because it relies on extremely advanced mathematics and computer science allied to a proprietary database that they've put together, which identifies individual entities and companies active in the Bitcoin arena.
So one to watch for a potential IPO in future then?
I think so,
Yeah.
yes.
And that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much, Victor.
Pleasure.
If you'd like to read the full article, you can read that at www.masterinvestor.co.uk. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next month. Cheers.